And Alex was so good to come here today to talk to us about product development, in particular the use of personas in order to learn more about your potential users and how you can think about them. So I hand it over to Alex. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. So most of you guys are majoring in economics, is that right? How many of you major in economics? And you guys are all working on an idea that you're taking through this class, is that right? And how many of your ideas are what you would call high tech? If you're working on a software application or something in technology, raise your hand. Okay, so about half of you are working on high tech things and about half of you are working on non-tech businesses of some sort. Is that about right? Okay. Well, what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is a few best practices that have come out of mostly high tech, but they're equally applicable to non-tech businesses. My personal experience is I run an enterprise software company called Leonid Systems, and we build enterprise software for businesses, in particular for communications companies like Verizon, France Telecom, people like that, to run their back office, stuff like that. And I'm also the author of a book called Starting a Tech Business. And starting a tech business is sort of a primer for the non-engineer who wants to participate in a technology business. And it's about taking your idea and bringing it to life and actualizing it. And that's what we're going to talk about here today in support of your class. And my main area of interest is a lot of new ideas about how to start companies and like design thinking and customer development, lean startup, things like that. But there's a huge gap between all those ideas and actual practice out there. I work with a lot of companies over the hill in the valley, and I have my own company and our customers. There's a big, huge void between actual practice and all these great ideas that everybody kind of likes, but doesn't actually execute. So you guys will have a head start on that as students. You can get an understanding of these things. And I'm assuming that you guys have the desire to learn about launching new ideas. You're in this class. I'm assuming that you guys don't necessarily have any particular knowledge of software development, and that may not even be relevant for some of you. And I'm assuming you guys are ready to take action and work on these new ideas because you're in this class and you're ready to go out and at least bring an idea to a kind of a fully developed state. Are those a reasonable set of assumptions about you guys? Yeah. Okay. So these are the four things we're going to talk about: ideation, planning, organization, and development. Ideation is the process of taking your idea and pulling it together conceptually so that it's ready to be executed on. And we're going to talk about kind of the way things used to be and the improvements that we've had over the last 10 or so years that make us much better at starting companies. And so back in when I graduated college, I was an econ major as well, and industrial engineering, and it was the dot-com period. Have you guys ever heard of that? You guys are probably in high school, maybe junior high school. So back then there was a lot of money flowing into the startup community, and you could pretty much do whatever you wanted, just about, honestly. It sounds ridiculous, but it was actually true. And so you had your idea was your baby, and you just stuck with it till the end, bitter, sweet, whatever. And now we have this idea of design thinking. So instead of just sticking with your gut and persevering through with your idea, you go out, and there's basically two primary tenets to design thinking. One is empathy, and the other one is creativity. And this idea of this, self-love, stick with your idea, ignore what people are telling you, it's kind of a classical idea in some ways. Henry Ford said, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me they want a faster horse. They never would have built the automobile. And so there's a certain validity to that, especially if you're truly, truly breaking new ground. But look at Ford now versus their competitors, and they're not really doing particularly well. So once you have product in the market, this whole idea of design thinking, of going out and observing customers, listening to what they say, is absolutely applicable and will benefit almost any type of business, high tech, low tech, new, existing. Empathy is the first major tenet of design thinking. What does empathy mean to you guys? What does it mean to you, the blue t-shirt?
Feeling what someone else feels.
Yeah. Did you say that, or did somebody else say that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. It's kind of a funny acoustic in here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, feeling what somebody else feels, that's right. And you know, as a manager, I used to sit around with my buddies and we'd toss around ideas. You know, and that was okay, but it was always moderately productive at best. And then I started doing this, and I started going out and watching what my customers and my customers' customers did. And you know, now I always have new ideas. These things are coming at me all the time. It was really about going out and trying to feel what the customer or the user is actually feeling. Really, really going out there and actually watching them. Like, you guys have TV here, right? Do you have Animal Planet? Who's seen Animal Planet? Okay, yeah. So they go out and, you know, they have like Meerkat Manor, that's on Animal Planet, right? It's like that, but with customers. You're actually going out and observing them in their natural habitat. You're not going out to them and saying, hey, would you like to, you know, have one of what I'm building? You're going out and you're observing them. So somebody went out and observed a seamstress, and they applied the empathy that they acquired through that observation to some very directed creativity, and they created sewing scissors. So if you've ever held, how many of you guys held sewing scissors before? Very different than regular scissors. Your hands slide right in them. You can sit, you can cut, and you know, seamstress, they cut a lot of things. They need very dexterous control over their scissors. So somebody went, observed what the seamstress needed, and created sewing scissors. And that's an example of how this works. And there's a couple of ready-made tools that you can use to apply design thinking. One of them is personas, this idea of creating kind of an archetype of your customer based on your observations with real people. And this is an example of a very bad persona, okay? It looks like this image came off the internet. These items here, they look like they, you know, women aged 28 to 45. Anybody could have just sat around in their dorm room and created these bullet points. This isn't a really good persona. Also, if you look down at the bottom here, it looks like this stuff came off a questionnaire. And so there's some subtleties about going out and asking customers questions and observing them that are actually really important. There's a great story. Sony, you guys know what a Walkman is? It's something that they had before they had iPods. That you can put a tape in. And Sony was rolling out a yellow Walkman. The Walkmans before that were black. And they did a focus group, which is a thing where they collar a bunch of people off the street, bring them in, and they say, what do you think about this yellow Walkman? And all the people in the focus group, they said, we think it's terrific. So much, you know, it's funner, it's more sporty than the Walkmans we had before. I like it so much better than this black Walkman. That was boring. This is terrific. And then somebody that was running this focus group, they had the foresight to put a pile of Walkmans on the left side of the exit and a pile on the right side. A pile of black Walkmans and a pile of yellow Walkmans. And the strangest thing happened. Nobody took one of the yellow Walkmans. Everybody took a black Walkman. So it seems strange, right? They lied to the focus group people. And it's an important point. People don't really think through exactly what they want at that level of detail, and it's the wrong kind of question. When you go out and you design discussion questions for talking to customers, you can ask them, hey, how many times last month did you buy potatoes? How do you feel when you go to the dentist? If you ask them things about how they feel or what exactly factually they do, you'll get pretty good information. If you ask them, hey, I'm thinking of making such and such of a widget, would you want one of those? Then you're going to get, you know, yellow Walkman data for the most part. Things that, you know, people are nice. They don't want to make you feel bad. You know, they're going to tell you your thing's terrific and they'd love to buy one, and then they're not going to really do it, you know. So this is an important point. This is a pretty good persona, and this is what personas are about. You see this photo is kind of lo-fi. It was taken with an iPhone. The write-up on this persona is, it's like we're in English class, and we're going to write a story or a play or something about this person. And when you create a persona, I highly recommend naming the person, like Bob the baker or Sam the shepherd. You know, and that helps you avoid the natural tendency to make these personas kind of arbitrary. So think about this person, even if they're synthetic, think about them like a real person, and that'll help you a lot. Once you have these personas, the best way to start creating actions around those personas, because you know ultimately you're creating a product or service that is going to enable people to do something. And user stories are a ready-made way to package up those feelings, particularly if you're ever involved in software development. They're also very directly applicable to creating new products. So before we had, you know, you would write a big long specification of what you wanted to build, and then people would try to interpret it, and stories are very consumable by the rest of your team that you're collaborating with, people that are implementing something, because they describe what you've observed and what you believe about what your personas want to do. And it's a really good way to encapsulate the understanding you've acquired by going out and talking to these customers. And they have a very specific format. As whatever my persona is, I want to do something in particular so that I can derive a benefit. And when I work with my staff at Leonid and startup companies that I help, one thing I notice is they frequently leave out this very last item because it's a little bit maybe less obvious than the first two. So you obviously need to say who you're talking about and what they want to do. But that third thing is actually the most important. And the reason why is because that establishes why you think they want to do what they want to do. And that's really a lot of what this design thinking rubric is about. It's not so much about actually building things, but determining what you actually need to build and making sure that it's actually relevant to the people that you're going to go sell it to, which is really important and very seldom practiced, especially in corporate America. So when you draft stories, there's actually a pretty structured way to organize them. There's this idea of epic stories. So you'll find when you start writing these stories, you're like, gosh, there's a lot of these, how do I organize them? Epic stories are a way of describing a very general thing that your personas want to do. You encapsulate those with stories under those epic stories. And then, like, I want to buy a bike. And then, well, I want to find prices for bikes would be a story under the epic story of I want to buy a bike. I want to test drive a bike so that I can see if I like it or not. That would be a story under an epic story. And then you supplement these stories with test cases. Now that is actually something that may sound a little bit software-oriented, but it's actually very applicable to everything else. And test case is a way that you supplement the stories with additional detail, things you want to make sure about. Like, you're building a website. I want to pay for something. Test case away, make sure it takes MasterCard, make sure it takes Visa. That's an example of how those test cases work. We'll go over an example of one of those in the next segment here. So how many of you guys know Banksy, the street artist? See, did you guys know this photo? Mind the crap. So the biggest thing about design thinking is, as long as you want to do it, you'll be able to do it. And we talked about the sewing scissors. You don't have to be the person that can create a pair of sewing scissors, but every single one of you can be the person that went in and understood that seamstress wants a different kind of scissor. And as long as you want to produce something good, something of quality, then you'll be able to do this. You'll be able to practice design thinking. Motivation is the most important part. Now we're going to talk about planning. So before, you had this idea of a 5-year plan. And this was very poorly suited to startups. And when you were talking to bankers or venture capitalists, everybody called the 5-year plan the big lie, because we all knew it wasn't really going to come true in exactly this way, but we felt like we had to do something. And the reason is you just, especially with a startup, a company that hasn't yet found the fit between its product and its market, it's just, there's no way to know what the business is going to look like over the course of 5 years. So there's a great substitute in this idea of iterative management, where we apply the idea of the scientific method. And this actually works really well, because as a manager, particularly in a startup, you have this very difficult pairing of uncertainty and urgency. So everybody's got a lot of pressure on them. At the same time, there's a lot of X factors in the business. Environmental variables, are you going to get this big deal or not, things like that. So having a 5-year plan is impossible. Having no plan at all, which is what a lot of startups end up doing, is equally unmanageable. So the great thing is, how many of you guys are familiar with the scientific method? Okay, good. So this was a good standby all along for managing businesses, it turns out. So in science, we have an idea, some kind of inspiration, and then we create a hypothesis around that, which is really just a set of assumptions that we can prove or disprove through a set of experiments that we design. So we execute those experiments, we focus our energy on those, and those allow us to either prove or disprove our idea. If we disprove it, we go back, we revise, and we take another shot at it. And if we do prove it, then we persevere, and we go and we scale up. And this is really applicable if you guys do end up going out starting a business, because what you want to do is you want to make sure you don't tool up and build a big, huge company with a lot of expenses until you've really proven to yourself that you have a good fit. And you may have to revise a couple times, most people do, before you get to that point. So the actual tools that you can use to do this are extremely simple and easy to use. This is a table with a set of assumptions. We have a priority. It's important to prioritize these. You want to put the assumptions that are most important and easiest to prove at the top for obvious reasons, right? It's cheap, quick, and it'll give you a good idea of whether you're on the right track or not. So the other thing is, does this assumption need to be proven? And this is an important point. You should lay out all your assumptions, but just because an assumption is important doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be proven, okay? So let's say we're going to build an app for parents to distribute allowances to kids. That needs to be proven, okay? You can post ads online. How many of you guys have used Google AdWords to test propositions? None of you.
Not yet, but they will in 2 or 3 weeks as part of this course.
Okay, terrific. So, you know, using Google AdWords is a lot easier than you think. With a very moderate amount of money, probably the amount of money you guys spend when you go into town on a Saturday night, you can go out and you can run a little ad campaign, see who clicks through and what they do. Whether you have a high-tech or low-tech business, is a great way to do some initial validation on whether your proposition intuitively hits with your target audience. So, and that's a good way to, you know, to go out and prove something like parents organized they want an app to do this. You know, you create a couple propositions, you put them in these AdWords, and you see if people click through and what they do when they click through to the destination. No food. The parents have smartphones. Okay, this is really important. Let's say if we're going to build an app, right? But we don't need to prove that. It's well understood. It is important to state it though. You guys you're familiar with the business model canvas. You guys have covered that, right? This is a good tool. Actually, Alex Osterwalder is with the same group I am at Wiley, and we actually use a lot of similar techniques in the book, and I think that they did a really, really good job of interleaving technique and examples, and this thing's very easy to intuitively grasp, and yet, you know, his book is good if you want to, you know, see examples and go to the next layer of depth. So I won't go into this in detail since you guys are already familiar, but this is certainly a good tool, and the reason why it's good is, you know, I've come out here and I've said, well, the 5-year plan is a bad idea. You need something in addition to this iterative management to make sure you've hit on all your major bases and thought through the composition of the business, and that the knee bone connects to the tailbone and it all kind of makes sense together. On financial planning, one of the most important things I've noticed in the companies I work with is that you kind of need a bimodal distribution of focus on financial models. On the one hand, you want to be extremely detail-oriented in the short term around expenses, because that, ironically or not, will keep you from having to worry about money every single day. You know, you plan your expenses out, don't plan for any revenue, and you just don't have to worry about money for this first period where you're learning, and your sales there's a lot of uncertainty around those. On the other hand, you want a way to see what the business looks like at scale, particularly when you understand the unit economics, meaning, you know, how much money you're going to make on an individual unit of sale. What you don't want to spend time on, and what I see a lot of startups waste time on, is kind of this middle ground. What's the business going to look like in 2 years, and having a lot of detail around that. And the reason why is, if I asked you guys, what's the weather going to be outside this classroom tomorrow, you could probably look online, and in about 30 seconds you could probably tell me with, you know, reasonable certainty what it would be, right? But if I asked you guys, tell me what the weather is going to be out there tomorrow, out to 3 significant digits, there's just, no matter what you did, you wouldn't get a more accurate answer. And that's the kind of thing you want to avoid with this financial model. You know, just because you put a lot of work in it doesn't make it more accurate in a lot of areas. And I think these 3 things are a pretty good way to do lightweight planning of a new business. They're very effective. We use them at Leonid. It's been great for us. So you have a set of assumptions, the business model canvas, and a lightweight financial model. There's an example on my website. Kai's got a lot of background in finance. Professor Pomerang, sorry.
Kai, okay.
Okay. And we're going to go over a couple examples of using those shortly. So let's go over how this scientific method thing works for startup again. We have our idea, and we ask ourselves, because we've gone out and talked to people, do I have real evidence from my buyer that this is compelling? And we've learned that by going out, having an empathic view of this person. Then we lay out our key assumptions, which is our hypothesis, in a way that they can be proven or disproven with a tenable set of experiments that we go out and execute. And this is a great thing for you guys, especially if you're doing this part-time. You know, you're busy, you've got other classes. It's really, really good to have this kind of nice, visible, simple focal point for developing the business. Then you're either going to decide, hey, I've disproven this, we were off, we're going to loop through this again, or yeah, this looks good, let's put some more money into it, let's put some more time into it, looks like it's got a good shot at going. Now we're going to talk about organization. So back in the dot-com period, one thing that was sounds crazy, but there's this idea that we're going to take this startup and we'll make it a big company by acting like a big company. You know, it sounds crazy, but that was very popular. You know, we bring in a VP of sales from some big company. This guy closes big deals, so he's going to close big deals for us. And it turns out that that's a very silly proposition, and it doesn't make any sense. And the new idea is this idea of customer development, that when you have a startup that hasn't yet figured out its product and its market and how they fit together, it's just fundamentally different than a big company. Not in a scale way, but in a fundamentally different way. And the alternative is this idea of a customer development team. And unlike a large organization that has an org chart, it's very departmentally driven and process driven, a customer development team is relatively fluid. You have a heterogeneous team, different people with different skill sets that are working very closely together without a lot of formal structure in very short cycles. And this is a good way to develop a startup, in that the skill set you have when you're selling a known product to a known market is very different than the skill set you have when you're in a startup and you're going out and you're trying to actually figure out if there's a fit between the product and the market. We actually do both of these things at Lean. We have relatively traditional approaches to how we develop and sell and service things for our mature products, and then for our new stuff, we have customer development teams that are very focused on just learning whether or not there's a fit between the product and the market or not. One thing that I hear a lot of people say is this idea says that big companies are bad, it's not good to have processes and stuff, and that's definitely not true. There's plenty of startups that fall on their face because they fail to develop those processes and those more scalable ways of doing things. It's just to say that when you haven't ascertained, is there somebody who's going to buy this thing from me yet? You don't want a big process-driven organization because you're galloping towards, you don't know where, maybe probably off a cliff. You want an organization that's very focused on learning. So let's look at how all this stuff comes together for a typical startup, the old way and the new way. Our founders get a great new idea. Okay, they create a 5-year plan that shows 10x returns because that's what investors want to see you do, invest in a risky new venture. Is this making you sad? Because it makes me sad, this proposition. The chain of assumptions to get to a 10x return over 5 years and actually be right about that, you have better odds of just buying a lottery ticket. It's almost impossible to be that accurate in your predictions. And let's say they raise the money. They're in a hot space, the person wants to invest, or their dad is a principal at a VC fund. VCs are in a scale business themselves. They want to put a lot of capital to work. Otherwise, it just isn't worth the work for them to evaluate the whole thing. So these guys bring in a menagerie of professional managers, and the problem is that big company experience is fundamentally different than startup experience. Big company, you're applying recipes to scale something that's well understood in a repeatable way. In a small company, in a startup, you're very focused on getting your hands dirty, going out, practicing design thinking, talking to customers, learning what's going to work and whether it's going to work or not. So these new hires come in, where's all my staff? We've had this problem. I've had it as a manager at a couple places. These new hires from these big companies are putting their big company recipes to work and they're just not working. So the expanded team is working to conform to this 5-year plan. It's impossible to actually make this work. It's time to go to your board, which is people that effectively own and control the company. And you're just making up this whole kind of lattice of BS. And I've done this so many times. And it's so hard, and it gets weirder and weirder, the stories you have to make up as you go along. And you can kind of see where this goes. The board gets nervous and things don't work out well. Let's see how this works when we do the things we just talked about. So our founders get a new idea. They lay out all their key assumptions. They go and they start doing hands-on validation of the most important assumptions, and this probably lowers the amount of money they feel that they need to raise. Why? Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is? Why do you think that it's so important to lay out those initial set of assumptions before you go raise money? Yeah. What? You look like you have the answers. Okay, I'll come back to you. The reason why it's so important is that when they go out to raise this money, if they go out with a 5-year plan that says we need, whatever it is, relatively large amount of money, $1 million, $2 million, or you know, if it's a small business, $500,000, you know, you're asking these people to buy into a set of assumptions that haven't been proven. That's going to raise the risk for everybody. They're going to want a big piece of your company. They're going to be very edgy about this if they even do it. Laying out these assumptions and going through and validating them and organizing the business so that you step through and you validate these things in little chunks is going to reduce the amount of money you need, and it's going to reduce the risk for everybody, which is one of the hardest parts about running a new business is risk. Risk scares everybody, particularly people that supply capital, which you'll find you need to grow, even if you're having a successful business. So these guys approach these investors for capital, or they don't. At Leonid, I mean, we do several $1 million a year. We sell software in every single continent in the world except Africa and Antarctica. And we have a deal pending in Africa. And we never took any venture capital, which is relatively unusual for a software company. I don't think I could have done that 5 to 10 years ago. But you know, the cost of doing these things has come down a lot. These new techniques enable you to scale up in an incremental way, and it really works. It allows you to build a very large business without a lot of initial capital. So maybe these guys bring in investors, maybe they don't. If they do bring in investors, they bring them in for a relatively small amount of money that lowers the pressure on everybody. They have this set of assumptions. That is a clear, visible, easy to understand for everybody focal point for operating the business. So when they bring in people, part-time or full-time, those people have a very, very clear understanding of what their job is and what they need to get done. Some of you are going to graduate and you're going to go do a startup or participate in one. And one thing that you'll find is, you know, you walk in every morning and there's a zillion things happening. And one of the hardest things as a manager, as an employee, is to avoid just simply reacting to whatever phone is ringing or whatever person is screaming and yelling or sending an angry email, okay? It's very, very difficult to do this. And having a set of priorities laid out and a set of assumptions that you're going to prove out is a great focal point to use to ask yourself, am I just doing whatever seems to be urgent at this moment, or am I doing what's really important to actually building this business? So these hires are focused, the rules are clear, they're out validating these assumptions, they're driving towards that key pivot in the scientific method where they either say, look, we're on the right track, let's scale this up, or it looks like we're a little off, we're going to revise this and try it again. The progress is quick, the progress is measurable. When it's time to face the music with the board, which might just be the founders themselves, they've got a clear set of data to look at and say, are we on the right track or not? And this works well. Development. How many guys are familiar with the idea of agile development? You? A couple people? Okay. So the interesting thing about it is that while Agile was something that was founded around software development, it's increasingly popular outside of that area of the business. And the big difference is, you know, there's a lot of mythology about Agile, that it's this, you know, fundamentally better and it's hugely productive. But really the big difference about it is that you take smaller steps. There's a great story from the Lean Startup about this thing that people do. They record it online. They take 100 sheets of paper and 100 envelopes, and their job is to get these envelopes stuffed, okay? Have you guys heard this story? Yeah?
They've read the book.
Oh, they read the book. Okay, great. So you guys know that story. So this idea of small batches help you see if you're building the right thing quicker. You know, there's ways of doing Agile that make your teams fundamentally more productive. The biggest difference is that you get to see if you're barking up the right tree sooner rather than later and switch up if you're not. Waterfall was what we had before that. It's, you know, big plans, long thresholds for when you were going to actually see whether something made sense or not. And that doesn't work very well when you don't know whether you're building the right thing or not. And that's the biggest value of Agile. The other nice thing about Agile is that it has a very direct linkage with this idea of design thinking. The inputs to Agile are personas and user stories. And the idea is, instead of writing this big long spec that looks like a piece of legislation, you're telling these stories about the users, you're sitting with your developers, you're letting them interpret those and figure out what to develop. And that's extremely productive. We do that at Lean. It actually really works well. Now, if you go out and you Google about Agile, there's few communities of interest that have produced more raw words and documentation than Agile. I mean, there's huge books and websites and lots of orthodoxy and arguments and things, but the interesting thing is the Agile Manifesto, the original presentation of Agile, which came out in 2001, is only 68 words long. You guys could sit here and read it on your phone in a few seconds. And it basically just says that we value individual interactions over processes and tools. We value working software or working product of any type over big, long pieces of documentation. And we value collaboration over contracts. And this is probably the most applicable one for what we're talking about here, is we value responding to change over blindly following a plan, and as they said in Lean Startup, achieving failure. I think that's a great phrase, because I've seen that happen many, many different times. When you're doing Agile and you're the product owner, you're the person who's going out, talking to people, and you're kind of responsible for shepherding the idea, in your present iteration, which is what those cycles are called, you're going and you're collaborating with the development team, you're answering questions about the stories you wrote. On the past iteration, you're going out and you're validating, and this is really important, you're validating that what you built actually makes sense, probably against that set of assumptions that you went and laid out. And then for the future iteration, you're figuring out what are you guys going to build next based on what you're learning. So, in summary, on these concepts, design thinking gives us a creative direction, personas, and user stories. This idea of iterative management, the stuff you guys read about in Lean Startup, gives you a set of assumptions and experimental design. Customer development gives you a very appropriate way to organize roles with your team. And Agile gives you working product in small batches so that you can figure out if you're barking up the right tree or not. So before we move on to the next segment, which is going to be an example of a company actually doing this stuff, do you guys have any questions?
Andrew? Just kidding.
All right, so we're going to go over a story about two people who are starting a company together. They work together, they have an idea about an app for families. And the cool thing is they understand that they're both parents in our example, and so they have kids, and they understand that they think they want to do an app for families. Nobody's gone into this space and really built something fantastic that everybody uses yet. But at the same time, they kind of recognize, this is our direction, but we need to go learn more about other parents. We're a parent, but we don't want to build something just for ourselves, because that's not necessarily what people are going to want. So Jen, who's one of the founders, goes and she visits her cousins in Sacramento and San Diego. These people have kids, they're out, carting them around, and she hangs out and she just observes. She has an iPad, she makes notes, she has a set of discussion questions, but she's not there asking people questions on a numbered questionnaire. She's asking them things, she's observing, she's making notes. She's taking photos and video if she can without freaking them out. Otherwise, she's just taking notes on her iPhone or iPad, whatever. And she starts to put together a set of user stories about these parents. They're generally directed towards some kind of app they're going to build, but at this point, they recognize that they don't want to drive to exactly what this thing is yet before they go out and they learn about their users. And they learn a few things. That these families, one, have very little express interest in an organizational tool for families. So does that mean they should can it? Because people said that they didn't want an app for getting their family organized? What do you guys think? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. They also learn that, in fact, organizing the family, making sure, who's going to take Timmy to his guitar lesson and things like that, this is a big problem. It's not like they are organized. So I think what they can conclude from this is they can't go out and sell and market this thing as an organizational tool, but there may be some validity to the whole thing. They've gone and talked to power users. You usually have a set of people that everybody else looks to for recommendations in a certain area. And they find that there are these people, there's parents that they have blogs, and they talk. Nobody goes to college to become a parent, right? So these people are all kind of learning from each other, helping each other out. And that's actually really good, because when you have these influential users, you can take product to them early, and they may say it sucks, but at least you find that out quickly. And if they like it, they're probably going to tell people too, is the other side of it. So they also learn something that's a little bit non-obvious and they didn't expect. They learn that these families want to be offline more than they want to be online. So an app isn't really quite the right thing for them. So these families are grappling with creating quality time, slow time, when not everybody's in front of the TV or the computer or typing a text message or something. So they decide they're going to focus on that. They come up with an app called Pheasant. It's going to have a Facebook component, a website that people log into, mobile apps, periodic emails people can subscribe to, and they start drafting stories. We've talked about those guys are familiar with them. Let's go through a couple examples. So an epic story, a story that encapsulates a few other things that the parent wants to do is, as a parent, I want to post a roster of chores so that I can link it to handing out the kids' allowances. So here's a story, a sub-story within that. As a parent, I want to create a list of chores so that I can divvy them out to my kids. So do you see how these stories kind of help? I mean, they really help you actually think through what these people are really going to do with the product when they sit down and actually try to use it. Yes?
That's interesting. As a parent, I had the same exact idea a while back to develop something like that, but I never got around to it.
Yeah, me either. I just totally made up all this, by the way. So you guys can go do it. And do you see how the test case works? So make sure there's a preset list of chores that they can choose from. Make sure these are available in an autocomplete as user types. And so you can kind of see what these stories and these test cases help you do is really, really, really get into the user's shoes and think about how they're going to experience your product. And again, I would urge you to consider this even if your product is not a piece of software or an app or whatever. Because, you know, experience of buying a bicycle, I don't know why people ride bicycles around here. How many of you guys have a bike? All of you probably, right? Yeah. So, and you buy a bike, you service a bike, it probably, you know, you run in all sorts of little details that are actually interesting if you capture them. And you know, doing a better job with that stuff is really important. You know, a good example of an offline company that, yeah, they're criticized for their instructions all the time, but you know, IKEA is very, very good at, they really engineer the customer experience in a very detailed way, especially in-store and with the physical product. Maybe not so much online, but with the in-store experience and the product experience, you know, this is a company that I would say probably does these kind of things and thinks through the customer experience in a lot of detail. So you can see how this next task, this next story is a sequential thing of, you know, we're stepping through and we're seeing how these people are going to actually use this thing. On planning, they start laying out their key assumptions. Families have a desire to organize quality time, this idea of slow time. You know, they have some anecdotal evidence, but they really need to prove that families actually want to do that in this fashion. So they run ads online with a proposition. Those ads lead to a landing page on a website, which they see if, you know, people click through to those and what they do on them, if they read things that are on there. Our families on Facebook, they don't need to prove that. It's very pivotal to their thing because they see that as their primary entry point to interacting with the user, but they don't need to prove that. They don't need to prove that families use mobile apps. They do need to prove that they find this Pheasant solution credible, because these guys have moved from a simple organizational tool to an actual habit that they're encouraging these companies, these parents rather, sorry, to adopt. And so they need to, they're just regular parents. You know, are these other parents going to find them a credible source of information about how to organize their family? And they start to grapple with this, so they find this guy, Jack Chernow. This is a fake guy, and sorry. He is an author about creating this type of slow time. This is made up, but this is the kind of thing you find when you lay out all your key assumptions. And I think that this example is a little bit interesting if you guys are, depending on your business plans, because I increasingly see businesses that are sort of high-tech, but they really have an editorial component, a content component, and that's increasingly important. Users pay for content now a lot more than they pay for technology, especially consumers. So they start stepping through this, and now they've moved out. I personally, this is sort of a detail you can figure out for yourselves, I like to keep the priority one assumptions to be the purely existential questions. You know, should I, you know, if this can't be proven, the business is no good. And the second order things are just sort of, you know, fine-tuning, next level thing about, you know, what direction exactly you take the product. So they step through these things. I think that there's this idea that if something's good, then it will go viral. And that may be true in some cases, but it's probably not the best way of looking at how you're going to take one set of customers, like the active parents that blog, and move on to the next set of customers and so forth. There's a classical way of looking at this, which is the technology adoption lifecycle. It was introduced by a guy named Jeff Moore in a book called Crossing the Chasm. If you guys have talked about that at all? No. So this was an adoption lifecycle originally created for farmers buying genetically modified seeds. And the idea is you can be moving up and to the right, you're selling stuff, but you're actually headed for the wall. Because there's a big difference between these early adopters who are kind of enthusiasts and they'll buy a new thing and they'll take a chance with it, and the mainstream market who's a little more pragmatic and risk averse and a little less inclined to buy new things. And so his point is, it's really important to find a beachhead in this early majority, and it's not a continuous curve of growth. You know, you have to leapfrog from this early majority who likes to buy new things to this market majority who is pretty pragmatic about what they buy. And this is still very applicable, it's important. It's a little bit less relevant now than it was, say, 10 years ago, because this was developed when technology decisions were more about buying a big piece of hardware, or, you know, Mac versus PC, back when that really had a lot of implications for what hardware you could use and things like that. The implications of signing up for a cloud service or downloading an app, these are a lot smaller. You know, I pay a few dollars, I spend some of my time. It's not zero, it's still important, but you know, it's not like it was. I think that billiards is actually a more facile way of looking at this. How many of you guys play pool? Okay, quite a lot of you. So I'm not a very good pool player, but the first thing I learned after I learned how to hit the ball was you got to look at where you leave the cue ball for your next shot. You know, it's not just about getting the one ball in, you've got to look at where you're leaving this other ball. So for example, I have a startup company that I help, and you know, they had an app and they're like, hey, well, we're going to sell this to moms with kids because we think they're going to be a really good market. And then these guys had another enterprise they were in with a rapper. You guys love rappers, right? Kids love rappers now. I think it was Snoop Dogg, or you know, it was one of these guys. Okay, and moms. So the idea was they were going to sell this to moms with kids and people that like Snoop Dogg. And these people probably spend a lot of time together in minivans, you know, but they're not really on the same page. You know, kids don't want to buy something their mom has, you know. So it's very important to look at, you know, is this segment going to get me the next segment that I'm trying to get, and have I sort of stepped through that? It's like a chess game. And you need to make sure that you're leaving yourself in a good position for your next shot if you've got an idea about what your larger market is. This is the business model canvas for this company. I'm going to skip this since I think you guys understand this pretty well. A lot of this stuff is webcasted online, and we'll send out an email if you want to go look at this after the fact. So these guys build their financial model. You'll notice a couple things if you just sort of flip through this. One is they get some initial financing because they've really reduced the amount of things they need to do to the things they need to do to prove the business. You'll notice that their contractor expenses ramp. If you guys are building software, you're really building anything at all, one of the most common mistakes I see people make is they're like, well, we're going to build a piece of software, or we're going to start such and such a business. Let's go start building something. And we'll get so-and-so to come in and do that for us. And what the problem is in the early phases, they really haven't determined what they want to build yet. So they're either wasting the money or the goodwill of whoever this is that's executing for them before they've really decided what they want to build. So you can see these guys, their contractor expenses kind of ramp because they're doing a few things to validate, flesh out exactly what they want to build before they start spending money on that, which is something I would keep in mind. And so they go through, they've taken this idea, you know, they kind of pivoted in the beginning, right? They thought that we're going to build an organizational thing. It turned out slow time was the thing. They tested that. They're going to test it with these early adopters, and either that's going to tell them they're on the right track or not. And this is an important point, it's just Jen and Jay who can, you know, do mock-ups and do this kind of early stuff that do this initial feasibility analysis. They don't need any specialists, they don't need anybody to build anything for them yet in the early phases, because they're deciding what they need to build first and making sure they have a nice solid underpinning to make sure that they're on the right track with that. And then they bring in contractors over time, and that's essentially how they scale up. Another thing, this is really important if you guys are going to create a little ad hoc startup while you're in school, or when you leave and you participate in a startup. You can see, even in a startup, I think it's really important to have an org chart. Make sure that roles are delineated. It doesn't mean, as you can see here, Jen's the CEO, but she also reports to Jay in various capacities. And that may seem like, why do you have an org chart? Well, org charts aren't just about establishing who's in charge. You also notice when you become managers that you feel less and less in charge the more people you have working for you. But the important point here with the startup is that delineate roles and responsibilities, delineate who's responsible for what, but don't assume that, you know, if you know one person's on the top, they can't also be on the bottom. That's fine, okay? And it's not a good reason not to establish an org chart. This way, everybody knows who's responsible for making the final decision in a certain area, and everybody knows if they bring somebody in, how they're going to slot into the organization as they scale. So I think that if you guys are thinking about doing something in high tech, there's a set of, I get the question, I have a student that I mentored through high school, and he just graduated from college a couple years ago, and he majored in business. He said, I think I want to go work in a high tech company, but is it too late? Can I learn how to code? Well, A, it's definitely not too late if you want to materially participate in a tech company, and B, learning how to code is not necessarily the most important thing, particularly these days. I think these foundation concepts that we went over today are absolutely where I would start. Okay? And then it's great if you're going to be in the software business to get some basic technical literacy. There's some very simple foundation ideas like the model view controller framework, which is an example on my website. You can Google it on YouTube and find it. Learning a few architecture fundamentals, like what's the difference between a plugin and an API integration, and then learning the roles and systems in a technical team. What's the difference between a sysadmin and a developer? These things will help you a lot if you're going to participate.
Alex, what do you think, how long would it take someone who doesn't know anything about the basic technical literacy items? Is it a matter of days or a few weeks?
Yeah, I think so. Well, honestly, I don't want to overmarket the book, but my book's 250 pages. I think if somebody reads that or something like it, they can get a pretty solid idea about all these things in that however long it takes you to read 250 pages of sort of moderately stuff.
Okay.
I believe that's true. I mean, that's why I endeavored to do the book.
Okay.
So not very long, because you don't need to learn these things in a lot of detail. It's just important to learn the foundation concepts for what they are. And then, what you ought to do is, get the basic idea and go back and refer to them as you run into them in actual real life a little bit. And with that, I think you can do a pretty solid job of learning these things. So, and then at that point, only after you've covered these fundamentals, which I think you can do in a very moderate amount of time, a week or so of very, very focused study, or several weeks or months of, sort of looking at it periodically, then I think that's a good point to figure out, if you want to become an expert in search engine optimization, or making websites, or coding things with Ruby, or marketing, product development, what have you. So this is an example of how Agile works. Again, I think this is very applicable to, if you're doing software development or you're doing non-tech development. These guys have their first iteration. So they have their different areas. There's certain things that do have dependencies on each other. They organize around those. And then, it's not a feature of Agile that they plan out what they're going to do subsequent, right? They're going to do this. They're going to try and validate that what they did makes sense. And then on that basis, they're going to decide what they're going to do next. But they do have probably a notional idea of what they're going to do to those different cycles. But it can change. So that's the, do you guys have any questions? I have a quick template I'm going to show you guys what you can use as a starting point if you want for your project.
Yeah. You said that, I don't know, knowing how to code isn't that important, but if you're
unless you want to be a coder, then it's important.
Right, but if your business is based on an application, for example, doesn't it really help as far as product design to understand the small things that happen within the product? Or?
No, it doesn't. Especially if you're only going to, I'm saying this to somebody, as an undergraduate, I majored in economics, and I majored in industrial engineering. I took three computer science classes. So I had, sort of a basic idea of what it all was, but, I never developed like a large-scale application. And I had an internship where I wrote some front-end code, crappy stuff, and that was it. I run a software company now. I think that especially if you're only going to learn a little bit, it's great to, I would absolutely do it if you find it interesting. Okay, and I think it's a great way, it's probably a lot less hard than you actually think it is, and it's a great way to, apply yourself. It's a good intellectual exercise that college is a great time to go do it, so I would absolutely encourage you to do it. But I would not expect that it's going to give you a major edge in working with software developers. It's much better to understand those foundation concepts. Because with one or two computer science classes, you're not going to be able to vet what they're doing. You're not going to be able to say, oh, you should have used 3 loops there rather than 2. It's just not going to help you in that way. It'll give you a little bit of an intuitive idea about what coding is. But if your job is going to, you got to either, you can put yourself in a position to do both, particularly at this point in your lives. But you really want to decide, am I going to be the person that decides what we should build and has a good intuitive idea about how to work with the people that are going to build it? or do I want to be the person that builds it? And you can do both. But you know, if you're going to be the person that determines what people ought to build and you're going to do the product design, it's most important to learn those foundation concepts, I think. That will help you more than having a passing idea of how to write software. Not that I would pass on, I would absolutely take that opportunity, but if your main focus is to be that person, the product person, yeah, I would probably prioritize that other stuff above learning how to code it a little bit. Other questions? Do you have any questions? Sorry, you're in the center of my vision, so that's why. So this is a template. It has a complicated address, but it's actually just ref.alexandercowan.com/pdesign. I think I'm going to send you some notes, and yeah, he'll post it. God will post it. But this is an actual template that uses an example company in the book it's another company called EnableQuiz, another synthetic company, that they build an application for quizzing technical people. So you're a manager, you're going to hire a Java developer. These guys build quizzes where you can get a quick assessment of like, well, are they sort of a 5 or a 10 on this? And that's their business. Okay. So what you'll find in here. Is a few key tools for doing the various things that we talked about. So first, you will find, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start learning, okay? And you may be doing a little product development and a little bit of design at that point, but primarily what you're doing is you're going out, you're doing this direct observation, you may be researching online and prototyping, okay? And you're having direct contact with customers. So what you'll find in the template that I think will help you quite a lot there is there's a set of example personas that you guys already know all this stuff. There's a set of example personas. Preceding that, there's a set of example questions about what they're going to ask them. So these particular questions are designed for EnableQuiz, but the objectives that you see there, those are things that I would kind of step through. You know, if you're going to go out and talk to users, these are the things that I would make sure that you cover in some fashion. You want to understand this person like you understand your best friend. That's the narrative part, the descriptive part about understanding the persona. You want to understand their operating environment, whether that's an app for a family or an app for a body shop or a bicycle part. You want to understand everything about how they're going to come into contact with your product and use it. And there's some examples about how to do that in their case. You want to understand their learning environment, because by definition you probably don't have any customers yet. How are they going to find out about your thing? This is a really important question to address early on, because it may affect the way that you sell and market and design the product. So I would take a look at these if you're going to go out and talk to customers. You guys are all familiar with Google Docs probably, right? You can just download this and use it. And then there's some example personas. Again, you can see that these are very vivid descriptions of these people. We give them a name. It sounds a little hokey, but you'll actually find that it really, really helps a lot with this tendency to sort of get arbitrary about who this person really is. As the more that you have respect for them as an individual, the more you're going to keep yourself from going off track and getting kind of arbitrary and abstract about who they really are. And you also find some example user stories in here with test cases. So you can use this as a template, and fill in your own stories here. And if you guys kind of regard, everything gets sold online to some extent. How many of you guys have used Google Trends? A couple of you, okay. So this is a great, what did you guys use it for? What did you use it for?
Just for fun, just browsing around.
Okay. And how would you describe Google Trends, what it does?
It just looks up like whatever's, I guess, popular or searched often.
Right.
It shows when something's been searched a lot and at what time.
It's kind of like hashtags.
Kind of like that, yeah. And the other handy thing it does, so EnableQuiz is going to sell this idea of technical quizzes. And one question they're going to have for themselves as they build their website and they test AdWords, which you guys are going to do yourselves, is how do people talk about these things? Particularly when you're trying to reach people above all these other things going on online, you need to make sure that your language is razor sharp in terms of the way that people talk and think about these things. And especially if you're doing something new, you need to think about a way to explain it to them in terms they already know. And so the first thing you need to do is go out and create your personas and make sure that those are based on real empirical work, talking to actual people. Then you can go to Google Trends, and the interesting thing is, so let's look at technical quizzes. Because they think this is what they're going to search for. You can kind of tell, this data looks really noisy, right? That these big, huge spikes, and there's sort of nothing over here. It basically looks like not a lot of stuff has been searched for. Related terms is actually the part of Google Trends that I find I use the most. Because what's interesting there is Google has their own algorithms for figuring out, if you said technical trends, people really look for something else entirely. That's a great way to test. If you have something you're going to put in your AdWords, you should absolutely put it in here. It'll take you 30 seconds, and you can see the other, whether it's trending and the other things that people search for. Let's search for something else. Let's say they want to figure out whether people care about Ruby developers and whether that's trending. Because that may be one of the terms they use, a technical quiz for Ruby developers, right? Okay, so we see this is trending, and it's, it's actually kind of recently fallen off a cliff. This actually looks a little funny. It might be an incomplete piece of data. You can also search for, let's say they want to see, are people looking for Windows admins? See, now, that's interesting, right? People actually are looking for domain admins, enterprise admins. Okay, so Windows admin maybe isn't the best term to use, right? It's clearly not trending. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand how this scale works? They don't actually tell you how many searches there were, but they tell you how it's a trend, right? So this means there were the most searches here, and these things are sort of trailing off. And what you'll see a lot of the time, particularly with a big general term like Windows admin, is that it's trailed off over the last few years, mostly in favor of probably more specific searches. And the great thing is, with related terms, you can go out and you can see what those probably are. So back to our template, you'll find user stories in here. And have you guys gone over positioning statements?
No, we haven't.
There's a template for a positioning statement in here. That's a great thing to have, even if you're early in your development. There's a template for it up here. For target customer who statement of need or opportunity, the product name is a product category that statement of key benefit, unlike the primary competing alternative, which may be a totally different thing. Our product, and then you make your statement of primary differentiation. And this is important to think about this in terms of not only direct competitors but substitutes. I used to work for Nestle in China, and we sold Kit Kats. So you guys had a Kit Kat? Mm-hmm. The primary competitor to a Kit Kat in China, in Beijing, in 1997 at least, was a dozen eggs. So it's really important to think about what decisions are people making. Does that sound weird? Yeah. Well, it's because it was the people were increasingly wealthy and they were able to buy things. The Kit Kat obviously is not a very nutritious food choice, so you have to have the money and the luxury time to go and buy a Kit Kat rather than buy a staple food. That's kind of how that works. So make sure you're not just thinking about direct competitors, but you're not also thinking about substitutes and alternatives. So we'll send out a summary thing. This is a good way to actually apply some of this stuff if you're interested. AlexanderCowan.com, on the speaking page, I have some low-tech examples if you guys are interested in those. So if you see here an example for a small business, if you're in a non-tech business, this is about the Penny Ice Creamery, which is a local business in Santa Cruz. That's a dairy and a retail outlet. And if your business is non-tech, you might find that interesting. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. Very interesting talk, and hopefully everyone learned a lot. Thanks for your time. And I will post the link to the website and the template on Piazza, so you can back there. I looked at the penny ice cream example, how to use personas for a non-software company, and it's really well made and very interesting, so I recommend that you check it out. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.